Shalom. We're starting a text from Deutronamy chapter 18 that I will read for you now from the King James Version, modified into a little bit more modern English. Verse 9 and 10 of Deuteronomy chapter 18. When you come into the land which the Lord your God gives you, you shall not learn to do after the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone that makes his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that uses divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch, or a charmer, or a consulter with familiar spirits, or a wizard, or a necromancer. For all that you do these things are an abomination to the Lord, and because of these abominations the Lord your God drives away out these nations from before you. This text, which I didn't read only in verse 9 and 10, I read several more verses after it, essentially sets Israel apart from the nations that were inhabiting the land of Canaan before Israel. And Deuteronomy gives their participation in witchcraft, in divination, in passing their sons and their daughters through the fire, in all kinds of these kind of occult practices, necromancy and such, the reason why God has driven them out of the land and given the land to the people of Israel. And I think that today in the church and also in the synagogue, not only in the church, both among the Jewish and the Christian and generally the population of our world, especially those who claim to be Jews, Christians, and Muslims, there is kind of a mixing up or erasing the borders between what is faith in one God, in the God who created the world, in the God who sent his Son to the world because he so loved the world and he didn't want to see anybody perish, but everyone have everlasting life. That God, the God that is the Father of all mankind, has been kind of watered down. And we have forgotten what it means to believe in one God. The Jewish people, we recite several times a day the Shema, the Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God. And the rest of the text. And we affirm that we are monotheists, that we believe in one God and in one God only. That is the essence of everything that the Bible stands for. From the beginning of Genesis all the way to the end of the book of Revelation, the oneness of God is the most clear and the most acclaimed truth of the whole Bible. We all say we believe in one God. And most of us do. Both Jews, Christians, and Muslims. We do believe in one God. However, how we set this guard and how we relate to him makes a whole lot of difference. That's why the first few lessons that I'm going to teach in this series are going to be dealing with monotheism, with faith in one God. The simplest definition of faith in one God is belief in one personal and transcendent God. That's how most of the dictionaries define monotheism. However, this definition is not satisfactory for me because it affirms that God is one. It affirms that God is personal, but it puts him only as transcendent. The God that I read about in the Bible is not only transcendent, but also immanent. And the best book to read about both the transcendence and the immanence of God is written by a Jewish philosopher from the 20th century, Dr. Martin Buber. who used to teach at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And he wrote a book that many of the Christian seminaries, and of course all the Jewish seminaries, demand their students to read it. It's called The I and Thou. The I and You by Martin Buber, that deals with this issue of the transcendence and the immanence of God. What does it mean, transcendence? Transcendence means that he is above. He is above creation, he is above humanity, he is above time, he is above physical existence. He is way up there in the heavens. And immanent is that he is down here also, that he is with us, that we can walk with him and talk with him and have fellowship with the Almighty God. Now these two elements, the transcendence and the immanence, are best seen in the history of the people of Israel, in the history of the people of God, because God's immanence is as important and is transcendent. He is not an impersonal God. He is a personal God. And we can know him. The idea that he is transcendent, that he is so far above us, like the unreachable star, way up in the heavens of the heavens of the heavens, and he is beyond our reach. However, the God of the Bible is a God that already in the Garden of Eden, after Adam and Eve ate from the forbidden fruit, walked in the garden and talked to Adam and Eve. He is already a God that cares about his creation, to the point that when he sees that man cannot live alone, he provides for him a helpmeet against him and gives him a woman to accompany the man and keep him company for the rest of his life. That kind of God that created the world and the heavens of the heavens and all the stars, the sun and the moon, is a God that's not only transcendent, but he is also immanent. And that immanence is best probably seen in that famous text in Deutronamy chapter 4, verse 6 through 9, that says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God." And immediately following that big statement comes, "And you shall speak to your children when you get up in the morning, when you go to bed, when you walk with them, when you travel with them. You shall tie this word on your arm and between your eyes, as front that's between your eyes, and write it on your doorposts." You can't get more personal, more eminent than that statement of Shema Israel. If Judaism has a creed, that would be the creed of Judaism. That text, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God." And when we talk about this oneness of God, immediately we should say that first of all, Israel is not the first to believe in one God. Already before Israel, in the time of Akhenaton, in the 13th century, 14th century BC, in Egypt, you had a pharaoh that will expand on him later on, that believed in one God, in the God Aton, the sun god, as being the only God and the only one to worship. Just believing in one God is not enough to be a monotheist. There is such a thing as called henotheist, people who believe in one God, but he is their God, he is their tribal God, their national God. He is one, and there is not for these people anybody beside that one God. But there are other gods that the nations can believe, can accept, can worship, and it's okay for the nations to worship another God. But our God is one. That attitude, that theology of henotheism is probably one of the worst scourges, one of the worst problems that monotheistic people have, because they're under the delusion that they believe in one God, but they make that God their private, tribal, or national God, and they deny the uniqueness, the exclusiveness of God as the only God that is real and true and creator of the universe, and there is none other than Him. Monotheism is essentially the faith that there is only one God, one creator. He is the creator of everything and everybody, and all human beings are His children, and He is the Father of all mankind, and there is none other beside Him. I realize that even in the Bible you have some henotheistic statements where let the nations go to their gods and we are with our God, the Lord. And when I say the Lord, I'm saying it like in the Hebrew Bible, Adonai, that is how we read the holy name of God, which is the tetragrammaton, the 4 letters, which some people pronounce it Jehovah, Yahweh, all kinds of pronunciation, none of which is for sure expressing the way that it was pronounced in the days of the first temple when Israel knew how to pronounce it. But already in the Second Temple period, which is evidence from the Dead Sea Scrolls, that 4 letters were not even written in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Hebrew script, which is the Aramaic script that they came back from Babylon after the exile and brought the old Aramaic script, the square Hebrew letters. Before that, it looked like chicken feet, but it was the Canaanite Hebrew script. It's called Da'at's script. By the time of Yeshua and the Second Temple period, some people knew how to write it, but they didn't know how to read it so well. So, in the manuscripts from the Dead Sea Scrolls, even the biblical manuscripts like Isaiah, the name of the Lord, that in Western languages is called Jehovah, was not pronounced. Instead of that, they called Him Adonai, the Lord. And in the New Testament text, even though we have it in Greek, it's normally written as the Lord. Kyrios, with a big kappa. And not pronounced as Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, or Jehovah in the English vernacular stated. And we as Jews don't use that term. And when we come to the text and we read the 4 letters, the Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, we usually say Adonai, because that is also the vowel points that are at the bottom of the text, the vowel points of the word Adonai, which means Lord. So, back to the idea of monotheism. The essentials of monotheism are quite simple. First, there is only one creator of the heavens and the earth and everything that is in it. He is the one Lord and Master of the universe. That includes the sun, the stars, and the earth and everything that is in it. Now, it's hard for us in a modern world to believe that there is one designer that designed the heavens, because we have sent the Hubble telescope into space and we discover new planets being born, planets dying, solar systems that are thousands and thousands and maybe millions of light years away from us. And we say, well, it's too big, it's too huge, it cannot be the creation of one. But we trust our revelation. And I want to share with you a story of my first year at the Hebrew University, 1964, at the Hebrew University in Givat Ram, Jerusalem. I go to my first class in Bible. And there stands a young professor, Orthodox Jew, dressed in a white shirt, black pants, a black kippah like mine on his head, And he gets up into this huge class of several hundred students in a big auditorium, and his first words were, Moses did not write the Torah. Wow, I was in shock. So were most of the other students that were there. We were raised on the tradition, Jewish tradition, which is also a biblical tradition, which is also a Christian tradition. Moses received the law, the Torah from God in Mount Sinai, and he gave it to the children of Israel. And they transmitted it. Like the Apostle Paul says in Romans chapter 3, the first verse, it says, what advantage does the Jew have? A great, and in every way, God entrusted the Jews with the scriptures, gave them the scriptures. So we all believe that Moses wrote the Torah, and he gave it to the children of Israel, and they transmitted it and kept it till today. And all of a sudden stands an Orthodox Jew in front of me, and he says, Moses did not write the Torah. I was in shock. I raised my hand. I said, Professor Rofe, can I talk to you? He said, come after class and we'll go to my office and we'll talk. So I rushed down the steps to the front of the auditorium right after the class, and we went to his office. He was a very young doctor at that time. And I said, you're an Orthodox Jew. How could you say that Moses did not write the Torah? He said, yes, I'm an Orthodox Jew. So what do you really believe? I asked him. He said, I believe that Moses wrote the Torah. So how could you say in front of the class, Moses did not write the Torah? It's a contradiction. He said, listen, I live in two worlds. I live as a Jew, an Orthodox Jew, according to Jewish tradition that for thousands of years hasn't changed. The same tradition that existed in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, and in the Second Temple period, and in the Mishnaic period, the Talmudic period, we still hold the same tradition. God gave the Torah to Moses in Mount Sinai. That I believe, and it hasn't changed. But I'm also a scientist. And as a scientist, I swim in different waters. I use scientific methods of thinking and analysis, and according to scientific methods, Moses did not write the Torah. It was written by a group of men, by sources, and different men from different schools had different opinions about the same events, and the text reflects that. I said, but how could that be? Truth is truth, and truth is one. He said, not so. He said, we in Israel go by the decimal system. We count from 1 to 10. We measure in centimeters that are divided to 10, by meters that are divided to 10, by kilometers that are divided to 10. But there are countries like England and the United States that go by the system that is different, but it's also true. The inch system that doesn't divide by 10, divides by different numbers. An inch is not a centimeter, and a centimeter is not an inch, and both of them are true as long as you don't mix the two systems. And he said, you have a watch on your hand, and your watch doesn't go by the decimal system either. I got the point. And that is that a person can look at truth from two different angles or from two different systems, and as long as you don't mix the systems and you remain in that system, you can make sense, and it's logical and it's acceptable. But when you crisscross the systems and mix between them, confusion sets in and enters in. So when we talk about one God, we are not talking about two systems. We are talking about one exclusive system. And that exclusivity is without compromise. The Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, holds that there is one God. Clear statements, hundreds of times, near 50 times in the New Testament, of the oneness of God. And any compromise on the oneness of God, any belief in more than one God, is called idolatry in the Bible. Any belief in more than one source of creation in the world is called idolatry in the Bible. There is one God who created the earth and the sky, the heavens and the earth, and the sun and the moon, and everything that is in between, the elephant and the ant and the grasshopper are all created by God, even the skunk. And so we affirm this truth as the central truth of the whole Bible. And we start with this truth, that God is in all, through all, from Him all that is came to be. That central truth is without compromise. There's very few things in Judaism that are without compromise. We believe, both as disciples of Yeshua and as Jews, that pikuach nefesh dochet kol mitzvot, that the preservation of life puts aside the commandments. It's more important than the commandments. If your life is in danger, you can lie, you can steal, you could even murder, or do all other terrible things in order to preserve your life. But there's only three things that you cannot do. One is, you cannot deny the oneness of God and worship idols. On this count, you die. You sacrifice your life, and you don't compromise. You cannot compromise also your place among the Homo sapien race. In other words, you cannot sacrifice somebody else in your place. If there's 10 people, how does it break down this concept? If there's 10 of you walking down the street, come bandits and say, give us Mr. X or Mr. Y, and we want to do him harm, and we want to damage him or even kill him, you all die and don't give one of your friends to the bandits and to those who want to take him. This is din moser in Hebrew. That's the commandment that forbids us from giving up one of our buddies, one of our friends, one of our fellow men, not only Jew, in order to be damaged so that to save our own soul. To save our own soul, we can break most of the commandments, except idolatry, except giving up one of our friends, and the third one is except committing incest. If somebody comes and says, commit incest, you die, you sacrifice your life, and you don't commit incest. These are the essentials that you die for. To eat pork, you can eat pork and not die. Other things, other sins, you can commit them to survive, you don't have to die. But idolatry is a sin that you don't commit. You die, you sacrifice your life, and you don't commit. We just read from the book of 2 Maccabees, the story of Hannah and her 7 sons, a story that it is alluded to in the book of Hebrews in chapter 11, toward the end of the chapter, in which a mother and her 7 sons were all executed by the Greek Seleucids at the Hanukkah season because they wouldn't bow down and worship the Greek king and the Greek idols and desecrate the laws of God. They all died terrible deaths in front of their mother, skinned alive, but did not compromise that oneness of God. So if I can summarize now toward the end of our study this time and say that monotheism is the idea that there is one God exclusively. He is a personal God, He is transcendent and He is immanent, and He is the creator of the world and everything that is in it. That is my definition of monotheism. An exclusive one God, not exclusively ours, but only one exclusive God that has so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son, that we may all have eternal life and not perish, that we get saved and not be damned. That God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, some of the philosophers and books dealing with God and with monotheism call this the Abrahamic faith. Okay, the Abrahamic faith. Before Abraham, there comes the Tower of Babel. Before the Tower of Babel, from Genesis 1 to Genesis 10, there is a lot of sin. And in fact, God destroys the world with the flood. But there is no mention of idols or idolatry. Humanity believed in one God. The idolatry came when God divided the nations according to tongues and gave each one their allotted habitation and their own language and created goyim, created nation. That's when idolatry came into being. We'll probably talk about that more. For now, I wish all of you blessings and continue to study and believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.